Welcome to the Sales Career Podcast. This is your host, Kevin Hopp. Whether you're an executive, sales leader, or just getting your career in sales started, I'm here to help you read between the lines and hear the real stories that you can't get from a resume or from a LinkedIn profile, all designed to help you shape your own sales career. Let's dive right into today's episode and see what we can learn. All right, welcome back to the Sales Career Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Hopp. My guest today is someone that I would call maybe a recovering salesman, someone who has since authored a book called Death of the SDR and launched his own consulting firm all around Buyer Centric Revenue and the Buyer Centric Revenue model. We're going to hear all about that. Everybody, please welcome the great and the powerful Nelson Gilliat.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, everyone. That is an awesome introduction. I love that. You're going to be my hype man. But I'm thrilled to be here. And just a quick clarification, it's not a consulting firm, it's an advocacy firm. The Buyer Centric Revenue model that I created in my book and the Buyer Centric Revenue firm, it's just to kind of get the word out there on the street and help answer people's questions about it.
I love that. So you're not even selling something, it's just advocating for there's a better way.
That's right. A nonprofit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a nonprofit, launching a nonprofit to try and end the SDR motion altogether. So, a lot of people listening to this, if you're listening to this by now, it's episode, probably 4 or 5. You know that Kevin Hopp's the SDR guy. Why would I ever bring on Nelson, the Death of the SDR guy, to my podcast? Well, background for everyone listening. I actually approached Nelson because I saw him launch the book not too long ago on LinkedIn. When I finally I saw it, I don't know if it says you launched it a little over a year ago on LinkedIn, but whenever you did launch it, I found it and I said, "Whoa, Death of the SDR! It's not dead. I've got SDRs I'm coaching today, right? I've paid my mortgage for the last 3 years through SDR work." But it's interesting to think that buyers are changing in the way they want to interact with folks, and that predictable revenue was actually written a while ago, and things move pretty fast in especially the software world. Maybe the pure SDR model of doing cold outbound isn't the best way to operate anymore. And I think that's the main message that Nelson and I were talking about, was the big differences there. And he's opened my eyes dramatically to different ways of doing it. And I wanted to bring him on the podcast here, not just to talk about Death of the SDR, but to put it in context of, Nelson, you're out there, it's Death of the SDR. And there's a lot of SDRs that see that and probably their feathers get ruffled a little bit. They're going to be a little, hey, what do you mean the Death of the SDR? I'm not dying. My job's not going anywhere. My job's not going to be replaced. Like, I'm not flipping burgers at McDonald's. It's not like you're going to have a robot do it. What do you mean, Death of the SDR? What I want you to do, if you want to start off here, talk to me a little bit about your sales background, right? And what experiences did you have in sales that kind of led to where you're at today? Like, so you have been a salesperson that carried a bag that had a quota, right?
That's right. And before that, I was an SDR, so I know firsthand what that was like. Like many people who want to aspire to a career in sales, you have to be an SDR first. It's a required stepping stone. And despite the name of my book, which is The Death of the SDR and the Birth of Buyer Centric Revenue, there's a positive message here. And there's a positive message for the folks that are in sales development today and for SDRs today, and how they can transition and improve and have more fulfilling and productive careers. And so, which is something I think a lot of folks that are doing sales development want. Many folks are suffering high turnover, low tenure, low performance, low job satisfaction, and they are trying to get into sales or into a different role within the company, whether that's revenue operations or marketing, as fast as they can. And so it's not a knock to SDRs, just to knock SDRs. What the book is about is it's proposing a new model called the Buyer Centric Revenue model. And that is challenging the predictable revenue model, which, as you mentioned, is based on, some stuff that Salesforce did 20 years ago. And so we're all still sort of marching to that stale old tune. And I'll tell you, I'll walk through my story and how I saw these problems and how I was trying to diagnose the problems and figure out what the solution is and how that eventually led to the book. But it led me to understand that the role of sales development is no longer the best way to go about generating and qualifying leads. And that was because I learned about demand generation. We've had chats about this and what demand generation is today. I didn't know that at the outset of my career when I started as an SDR. But as time went on, I learned more and more. I realized, well, that's the proper way of going about it. And it's not, the answer is not to have both, actually. It's to exclusively have demand gen. We can talk about why I think that is and my arguments for that.
Well, real quick, what's interesting is you had to name a book, Buyer Centric Revenue. And it just, looking outside in, looking at it, you're like, so you're telling me that people are out there advocating for non-buyer centric things? That sounds kind of silly, right? Like if you're trying to sell things, you have to make a process that is centered around the way people buy. But it just isn't that way, huh? It seems like there's this copy and paste mode of, okay, you want to sell people things, you have to go interrupt them. You have to send them a ton of touches, right? Sales gurus are in love with the idea of cadencing and 14 touches to get someone to respond to something, right? And then the other thing around like demand generation, like the reason that you had to coach me so much on what demand generation was, because I thought I was demand generation. I thought SDRs were demand generation. Yeah, I generate demand. I cold call people. And cold calling people is virtually tapping them on the shoulder, saying, hey, let's have a conversation about something I want to talk about right now and see if it's important to you right now. And then from there, you can get very buyer-centric with it. I advocate for it, by the way. I hope everyone out there knows that my model of cold calling, the Hopp Consulting way of doing things, SDRs hate their lives a little less because they don't feel like they're bugging people. They don't feel like they're doing that. But the core of it, we're bugging people, right? You're interrupting people. You're going to them. They're not coming to you. So demand generation is the art and science of getting people to come to you, right? I mean,
yes.
Is that
Some
right?
people will sometimes refer to that as the inbound way versus the outbound way. And I think that's a very confusing dichotomy because really all of marketing is outbound for the purposes of driving folks inbound. It's just I think there's certain outbound tactics like prospecting tactics, like sales development tactics that are bugging buyers and are inconsistent with better modern marketing methods that buyers appreciate more and are more efficient and effective. And so I actually think that the prospecting tactics of telemarketing or what I call email spam and LinkedIn spam and gift cards, which I consider bribery, I consider those tactics to do more harm than good. So it's not to say that, you'll never get a meeting or you'll never get revenue. It's just that when you compare that relative to demand gen and you look at costs, the hidden costs, the opportunity costs and everything, it's just not worth it. Especially, and I think it's important to understand the history of prospecting, the history of sales development to understand, and then where we're at today with demand gen to kind of understand why that's the case. And I think to your point, it's like there's a lot of folks out there in the sales development world who are trying to make sales development less buggy, less harmful, less annoying. But it's the nature of the SDR role. It's the nature of prospecting to actually go and bug people. So it's like you're handcuffed. And I think there's SDRs that are out there who are trying to do less buggy things, but they're actually trying to do demand gen, where they're out there, on LinkedIn posting or commenting. They're doing content marketing and social media basically, but there's no pitch, there's no sale, there's no, hey, you want to speak to sales? Hey, here's what we do. It's just I'm going to talk about things that my audience would find interesting and engage with my audience and like in a thoughtful discussion and a podcast like this where you're putting out your content, you're making people aware of you, interested in you. It's really interesting content. Hopefully they learn something, they enjoy something, they become, and they engage. You have them on the podcast, whatnot. I'm going to share this podcast with my audience, etc. There's the virality effect. I think a lot of SDRs are trying to move in that direction, but they actually can't because they've got these activity quotas, make X number of calls, make X number of emails. You got to make a lot of them, so that takes up a lot of your time. Do all this sort of manual marketing drudgery. And then not to mention you've got quotas or a meeting quota that you have set for you. That's typically short term, that's monthly, that you have to hit. Plus, roughly half of your compensation is withheld pending your meeting quota attainment. In other words, pending the buyer's decision to take a meeting. And that's what a commission is. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors that a commission is like a bonus, like icing on the cake, when actually, no, it's not. It's actually half your cake, which is withheld from you. And so people often think that a commission is advantageous, but it's actually quite undesirable. Not to mention all the other gimmicks and gotchas of commission and how awful that has, and I've experienced that. So
yeah. Well, hold on. Let's pull it back to
story.
You're saying a lot of things that I hope people in my audience are. If you're at the gym, if you're driving, wherever people listen to this podcast, if you're in sales, you're probably going, "What? What are you talking about? Are you kidding?" So let's try to put this in context. I'd like to talk to me a little bit about how, these ideas started coming to you or started picking up steam while you were working in sales. Like what was it in your sales career that drove you to think there could be a better way?
Yeah, totally. So I started my career as an SDR because I wanted to get into sales, and I didn't quite understand once I got into the role until it was too late, like what it entailed. And then once I realized that it's actually this type of marketing drudgery, that the purpose of the role isn't to help buyers that want my help, and then to demo them the product and answer their questions and to help them buy. It was actually to go and bug people to go and speak to sales. So it's a marketing role disguised as a sales role. And the reason why that is because historically, in the pre-internet era, just so you understand where prospecting and sales development came from, marketing or demand generation lacked the ability to engage buyers and connect with buyers, make them, informed and interested in speaking with sales, and then connect those buyers to sales. There was limited things you could do, like trade shows and print ads and stuff like that. And so, or flyers, it really wasn't that much. And so the question for marketing became, well, how do we get buyers to speak to sales? Because it's the salesperson that has all the information that a buyer needs, unlike today, where the buyer can get a lot of that online through marketing or through their peers on the internet. Yeah. But it was okay, well, the answer is we're going to go get salespeople out there. And we're going to have the salespeople go do field marketing, which was what outside sales or field sales was, which people would go and door knock. Or we're going to have eventually people go do digital door knocking, which was telemarketing. So we're going to have people do telemarketing to go and try and sell to buyers who haven't requested sales as help, because marketing just, wasn't what it is today. It didn't have the power and ability it had today. And so that was in the pre-internet era. Okay. And then basically in the late 90s, early 2000s, it became readily apparent that having sales do prospecting, and so they call this type of marketing by sales prospecting. Obviously, you're not going to call it marketing because that's going to raise some eyebrows. It's not exactly good internal marketing to say, hey, salespeople, go do this marketing, because it's not like marketing is doing sales. It's not like IT is doing HR. It's not like product is doing operations. It's so they call it prospecting, which, to be fair, was befitting because it's kind of like you're trying to dig through gold.
You're hunting for gold.
And so it's
that's where it comes from.
But it was so laborious. It was so time consuming. It was so and the results were so little for salespeople that it became readily apparent to the sales community, and it was also miserable. And it was the least desirable part of the job. And so as soon as you would get a buyer who wanted your help, you're like, oh, that's all I want to do. I want to help this buyer buy and do the demo, do the proposal, do the contract, do all the fun stuff in sales that, the reason why we get into sales, to have that, and also that one-to-one relationship to build a portfolio of customers who you're helping, and you're helping to grow that satisfaction and efficacy. That's wonderful in sales. You didn't get in prospecting. You just got misery and drudgery. And so in the late 90s, late 2000s, it was okay, it's so inefficient and ineffective for sales to do prospecting part-time. Plus, for prospecting to produce any results whatsoever, it has to be done constantly in large quantities and predictably. And so that's where predictable revenue came along. So basically, that it became apparent that prospecting had to be taken off sales' plate. And so they created a role to do prospecting full time, and that's where sales development came in. And the predictable revenue model, as we know it today, basically popularized or codified prospecting or sales development, or sales development, which is prospecting full time by SDRs and not sales. That happened in 2011 in Aaron Ross's book, Predictable Revenue, which was based off of his time at Salesforce in the 2000s. And so that is the core marketing strategy that B2B companies are marching to. Most marketing resources, including demand gen, are centered around facilitating SDRs and facilitating prospecting as a way to generate and qualify leads. Now, the reason why I'm going into this is because I realized when I was an SDR that what I was doing was not sales, but a form of marketing disguised as sales. And then when I eventually transitioned to sales, I was like, okay, so yes, this is what sales is. I'm helping buyers who want my help, whether the leads came from SDRs, whether the leads came from demand gen or from marketing or website demo requests. And then when I was both an SDR and when I was in sales, I realized that like the quality of the leads that come from demand gen or website demo requests were far superior and more desired by sales than the SDR leads, who are less likely to actually show up to the meeting to buy as fast or to buy as much. And so sales just had one of the hot leads, what we sometimes call the inbound demo requests. But at the time, I didn't really know what demand generation was. I didn't kind of understand where those website demo requests were coming from. And then when I got into sales, and I was an AE, and I realized I sort of learned that you don't build a book of business. You don't have customers that you help evaluate and then you help them be successful. And like you have like an assembly line of sellers where I would handle the initial sale, and then I would hand over my customer now to another seller who would handle the expansion and renewal. So, and then, sometimes you might have further subdivisions in an organization like that in sales. So I felt like I was only doing the partial sales role. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And like, I'm helping to create the relationship, but I'm not there to maintain and grow it. There's this weird handoff. The buyer doesn't really like it. They have to repeat themselves. It's kind of like, how can they trust me? And I'm not even responsible for that relationship onwards. It just seemed like it was a bad idea, and that it created, like in the sales org, just like an unnecessary type of complexity. And so I started to learn
to touch on that real quick though. It's funny that you mentioned that you thought it was this relationship, right? That you had. Like, I had the exact same experience where when I was learning about SaaS sales and I was getting into it, I was like, oh, okay, it's all about relationships, right? You hear people talking about sales is all about relationships. Selling, relationship driven. I'm a relationship builder sales guy, like number one relationship builder. And I'm like, okay, so when you close a sale, what happens? Oh, well, I pass it to customer success. Okay, and if they have a problem, who they call? Customer support. Okay, so where was the relationship was just in when they signed the contract? So the relationship part of sales is just getting someone to make a decision on your timeline most of the time, because you got a quota. Hey, you sign by the end of the month, I'll give you a slamming deal. Right? How many times have we heard that?
Yeah.
It's funny how we had the same sort of experience. I had that same like falling out with the romantic notion of I'll be a relationship type sales guy, right? Because when you do help someone in a sale, it's actually intrinsically rewarding, right? Sure, there's extrinsic, which is the cash that comes from it, but when someone comes inbound, or if you find that outbound nugget of someone who's saying, yeah, like this is a really big problem for us and we weren't really sure how to solve it, and this is solve something, and then solution A meets option B, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is actually a great moment. And that's where companies thrive, is in creating that.
Yeah. And
but being a cog in that wheel is less fulfilling than I thought it would be.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Is that
less fulfilling, less growth, less efficacy, because you only handle one aspect of the sales process and you don't have any responsibility for what happens after that initial sale, or accountability to the buyer, or that relationship that you build with buyers. And then I actually got my next gig, I was both an AE/CSM combined, so a full and complete seller. And I saw how much better and enjoyable that is, how much more productive that is for me as a seller, and how much more enjoyable it is for the buyer. And I was like, wow, this is a real and proper sales role. And you get rid of that whole like weird handoff and the complex sales org. And then it made me want to stay at the company longer, because I wanted to see my customers grow and like help them and be accountable to them. And I got further enjoyment out of, instead of just doing this one repeated aspect of just the initial sale, the initial demo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And right. So do you know, Kevin, how what I call in my book the sales assembly line or seller specialization came about, and why that's the second aspect of the predictable revenue model? Any guesses?
As to why that's the way it happened?
How that evolved.
I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head. I can imagine it would have something to do with scarcity of people that that would have the experience of doing it all the way through. What's always appealed to me is that SDR work is for entry level people, but to get really good at it, you actually have to have a lot of expertise at it, right? And so it's like if you just come out of school and you want to be a seller, you got to be an SDR first. But what if you're actually a really good seller, meaning solution builder, helping people, creating value, but you hate prospecting? Do you ever get to that point? Like maybe scarcity, inform me.
Yeah. So basically what happened before sales development came around to do prospecting full time as opposed to sales doing it part time. And so just for everyone, like consider sales development a form of marketing, not sales. I think that'll help people understand it, but because that's what prospecting is. But before they did that specialization of prospecting, what you had before that was you'd have a seller who would do prospecting, and then they were a complete seller, and so they were an AE/CSM combined. They would do the initial sale and expansion and renewal. That's a lot for one seller to do. Because prospecting was so laborious and time consuming and full of drudgery. So before SDRs or sales development came along, they did one precursor specialization to that, which is they said, okay, we're going to specialize the sales team into hunters and farmers. And this is when the sales assembly line was born. So we're going to have this, basically an AE SDR combined. What they now call a full sales cycle seller, which I think is very misleading. I think a full sales cycle seller should be an AE/CSM combined, not AE SDR. But basically they said, okay, we're going to have one seller do prospecting part-time, and then and that same seller is then going to handle the initial sale. So that's that seller. And then that's the hunter. And then the farmer is going to, after the initial sale, take over the buyer and do the expansion and renewal sales. Because again, it was just too much for one person to do. So remember, that's why we specialize stuff, is because it's just too much for one person. But it was because of prospecting was put on sales' plate, that they could not do the actual whole sales role. So, right. But even then, it was too much for the hunter to do. It was too much for the hunter to do part-time marketing or part-time prospecting, which is like the worst form of marketing, even back then, plus to do the initial sales role. It just was like, the context switch, the everything, it was too time consuming, too laborious, whatever. And as soon as you would get a buyer, obviously you just want to do the sales bit. So it was like so discouraging for sellers to have to do prospecting. Anyway, that was where the sales assembly line came about, and where I think that denigration of the sales role came about.
And that's such a different, for those of us out there, listening to this that are in a sales role, if you've never done outbound, it might be hard to understand just how different it is, right? Like how, the difference between prospecting, talking to people that don't know who you are, don't know why you're calling, and they did not ask to be called, and responding to inbound demo requests or responding to MQLs, where at least someone has brand familiarity and they attended a webinar and you're just following up on the webinar to drive further interest. It's such a different feel, right? One requires a large amount of your ego and the other one does not.
Totally.
Like your ego's on the line when you prospect, because what if they hang up? What if they tell me to go F myself? What if?
Totally. And a big reason why I wrote this book, and a big reason why I went from sales to now I'm like in the marketing hat, is because I found myself very dissatisfied with sales. And a big part of it was not only do salespeople have to do prospecting in order to get into sales, but oftentimes even when they become an AE, they're still forced to prospect to some extent. I think that's not like, I think it's marketing's job to generate leads for sales, and it's sales' job to close them. Or you don't see marketing doing sales, you don't see IT doing product, etc. So I see that that's a really bad sign of a company that doesn't have a proper sales role. And then the lack of the AE/CSM combined, so only having partial responsibility, ownership, and growth, and only being denied the ability to build relationships, in a book of business. And then I saw, and this is not to say to poo-poo the sales role. I think you can still find your fulfillment in the sales role and maybe work at a good company and whatnot. But for me, I had enough. In addition to that, I identify in my book two other I think crummy, outdated practices that negatively affect sales, that harm sellers, that make the role less productive and fulfilling. that are very undesirable, and we touched upon that, which is quota and commission. And I see quota as a bad type of sales goal and a form of seller performance measurement. And I can talk about what a good sales goal and performance measurement looks like. And then commission as a bad type of sales compensation. That again is like quota, hand in hand, undesirable, I think counterproductive, and really denigrate the sales role and contribute to, I think, the negative reputation of sales today that still lingers. And I think that there could be a nice renaissance that happens in sales where we can make the sales profession what it can be and ought to be, to make it more respectable. But they write the saying that if you want to be respected, you have to be respectable. And so I think that the sales profession is so calcified in some outdated, harmful practices that we really should rethink and sort of liberate sales from this sort of straitjacket. So that's a big reason why I wrote this book. But ultimately, for me, I found more satisfaction in marketing than in sales. It was just also for me, I found that a lot of my interest, and something for people in the audience to think about, is: are you more interested in wooing buyers in the door through writing and creative images and videos or whatever like that, so that they become aware of you and interested to learn more with the seller? Or are you someone who's more of the relationship person, who's like, I want that personal one-to-one interaction, where, and then I'm responsible for, and I have like these sort of customers I look after. So, do I want the marketing hat or do I want the sales hat? And for me, it was also, I just wanted the marketing hat in addition to the bad stuff that had occurred in sales. So I'll pause there. I know that was a lot. We can unpack quotas and commissions if you want, or if you want me to go on more about my career history and, things like that and how it all ties in.
Well, I got a few interesting comments here, right? Like I had a realization when, like, probably right when I got the nod to become an account executive at MindTouch, which was my first software sales role as an SDR, and I crushed it. I was a high performer, and then I got an AE title, and then my quota given to me, and I thought it was so interesting that to make your full on-target earnings, you need to get people to do things by a certain date, right? And I remember asking myself that question, well, what if for the people that I'm talking to that I have in my pipeline, the timeline doesn't work for them? Well, the answer is more. I need more. Well, then how do I get more? I'm not getting more from marketing. I don't have an endless list of people that are talking to me. And I remember having that same like logical conclusion where I'm like, the quota is incentivizing me to do things on my terms, which is probably not on their terms, right?
Yeah, exactly. So a quota, just to kind of define that for people, maybe is helpful. So a quota is what I consider a bad type of sales goal, in which a seller needs to generate a targeted amount of revenue within a given time period that is typically very short term, which is either monthly or
a month, quarter.
Yeah, a quarter.
Yeah.
Plus roughly half of a seller's salary is withheld pending that attainment. In other words, pending the buyer's decision to purchase, which is sizably outside of the seller's control, and that is what a commission is. And the whole purpose of quota and commission is to pressure sellers to pressure buyers while also underpaying sellers. It's a way to get sellers to work for free until the buyer pays the seller. So under a 100% commission model, the seller works fully for free until the buyer pays. And under a 50% commission model, which is the typical model today in B2B, the seller works half for free. And then in addition to that, quota attainment is used as the only metric, revenue attainment is used as the only metric to evaluate a seller's performance, instead of a holistic set of metrics, which every other department has. When you evaluate people, you look at more than one thing. And again, given that revenue attainment is sized outside the seller's control, it could be the quality of the marketing leads, the product, the demand, the whatever, the buyer, his appetite and whatnot. You need to look at a whole bunch more metrics. And that is why at the same company, you can have a good seller and a bad seller, and the bad seller has more revenue attainment than the good seller. There's just a lot of other factors. And so I think when you're evaluating a seller, you need to look at not only revenue attainment, but you need to look at conversion rates and sales cycle and churn and expansion and contraction, because I think, again, a seller should handle and hold on to their customers. They shouldn't hand off their customers to another seller. But you should look at your professionalism, your teamwork, your product expertise, things that managers should know to be able to say, is this seller efficacious or not?
Also, do you think if you like when I hear you say things like that, like I feel like, going back to the point around what's better for the seller would be better for the buyer, would be better for the company, right? So if you're evaluating salespeople on a more holistic metric and seeing how good they are to their colleagues, how good they are to the buyers, without only looking at quota attainment, wouldn't that be better all the way around? Like it'd be better for everybody involved.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a lose for the buyer.
But everyone does it.
Yeah.
Every company's doing this right now. Every single company's out there with a quota, and salespeople who are listening to this are shouting at their phone saying, well, then what am I going to do? How am I going to pay my rent? I got a quota on my head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I hear you. I think Nelson's out here asking the hard questions and like making people think twice. Like I'm thinking twice about this. Like, is this the right way to do it? To put a bounty on everyone's head saying you don't get half of what that number said on your offer letter until you get people to do things on your timeline, not on theirs.
Exactly. And I think smart sales leaders would realize that is counterproductive and harmful. And I think that as more and more sellers become aware of the true nature of quota and commissions, and sales leaders also that they will be an appetite and demand and not therefore supply for sales teams and sales leaders that have proper sales goals and performance measurement, as well as proper sales compensation. And so just to touch upon what that looks like. So instead of quotas, I believe you should have annual goals and not a quota, just like any other department, and the company as a whole itself has annual goals with monthly and quarterly tracking that is divorced from commission. In other words, you're not withholding 50% of a seller's salary pending that attainment. So you've got the long-term mindset, and it's divorced from commission. And also, I think that a seller's performance should not be publicly displayed relative against their peers on the dashboard for quote-unquote healthy competition, which is an aspect of what the quota is in order to like shame you and whatnot.
Scoreboard doesn't lie.
Yeah, and so I think that's a really awful thing. You don't see that in any other department where they publicize people's performance. You mentioned very briefly as part of the seller's performance metrics to include buyer feedback, like you get with customer success or NPS or any sort of qualitative feedback that a manager should know about the sales. I think that's also very important, obviously. That's what a proper sales type of goal would look like, where revenue attainment's on long-term horizon and divorced from commission, and you have a holistic set of metrics to evaluate a seller's efficacy. Now, for seller compensation, so I think that what's helpful for people, and I unpack this a lot in my book, is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors about commission to fool a seller. I was one of them, and I've been screwed over by commission multiple times. And it made me realize the true nature of commission, which really is just withholding roughly half of your salary, which you should get at the outset, pending an outcome which is sizably outside of your control, which is the buyer's decision to purchase. And that's a way for you, again, not to help you, but to pressure the buyer, which again is lose-lose. And so when you start to think about it like that, plus you start to think about all the other downsides of commission, like all the nuances and clawbacks, thresholds, ceilings, this and that and the other, and the fact that it resets when your quota resets, and so also that it takes time to build up pipeline and for you to even close it, and that if you have a long sales cycle or whatever, and typically you're changing jobs every couple of years, it's so it's and then it gets commission gets taxed higher than salary. It's harder to get a loan because it's variable income. All the fact that commission structures change every year, shit like that.
But it's uncapped.
Yeah. So this idea that it's it's potentially uncapped, or that I can write my own paycheck, is supposed to be the carrot that kind of fools you, because all it really is 50% of your salary. Maybe there's some upside there, but you have to take into context all those other negative factors that I just mentioned, plus the fact that most sellers miss their quotas. 70% of sellers or so miss their quotas, and quotas are often unrealistic, stretches. And so, what these companies are promising their OTE, you're not seeing. And then, on top of that, it's the same idea that, if I go play in the lottery or gamble, it's potential unlimited income. If I speculate in the stock market, it's unlimited income. That doesn't mean that it's a proper form of an investment, and you're investing your time in exchange for working for someone else. The best form of compensation in a 9-to-5 job is a salary and bonus for a reason. It's guaranteed predictable revenue, good cash flow that comes in upfront, full, transparent.
Predictable revenue.
That's right. That's the one case.
You're telling me there's a different way to do predictable revenue?
Yeah, and I'm talking about for sellers, it's getting that good money. And there are companies today that are smart, and sales leaders that are smart, and sellers that are benefiting from this. And those include Monday.com, Backblaze, Legion Logistics, Culture Amp, Pluralsight, Bamboo HR, to name a few, who've gone rid of commissions and are paying sellers properly their full salary plus a bonus. So you get the full cake plus icing on the cake. And also, if you keep in mind that it then incentivizes also teamwork, so the sellers are helping each other out. That also, you can take vacations now and enjoy that without having to worry about your paycheck and stuff like that. And you can actually enjoy your job of sales, of helping buyers and taking good care of buyers, and not pressuring buyers, and buyers trusting you more, and therefore you being a more successful seller, a virtuous cycle, because you're not fretting about your paycheck and you don't need to pressure this buyer and pester them in order to get paid. You're being fully paid by the company, and the company isn't outsourcing half of your paycheck to the buyer's decision to purchase.
Ooh, lot to unpack there. We're gonna run out of time to try and talk about all that. That's it. That's incredible. I guess one thing that I do want to suggest is one of the things that you haven't touched on, that when I think about this model, it sounds rosy, but how do you fire a seller then? Do they have a threshold where, since they no longer are hunting and they no longer have that urgency behind their actions, right? Because they're not having to produce with X within Y amount of time. How do you measure performance in an effective manner so that a company is not paying someone $150K
Yes.
to not sell?
So just to reiterate what proper seller performance measurement looks like to evaluate the efficacy of a seller. So you'd look at revenue attainment as one metric, but you'd also look at conversion rates and sales cycle and your average selling price and your churn or retention, your expansion of your customers versus your contraction of your customers, any customer or buyer feedback about your performance, whether that's in a survey or NPS or CSAT score, or any qualitative feedback like emails or in phone call conversations or call recordings, this and that the manager should be in tune to, or the sales manager should be in tune to. It's a seller's product expertise and their professionalism and their teamwork, what they're like internally. That is the way that you can measure sellers now. Again, believing that I believe in proper sales goals versus these quotas, it's also, okay, and it's the same thing even if you miss quota, but it's like the idea is, how much is a seller missing their goal, by how much, and how much is their responsibility and their fault? And is it repeating? Is it like they've missed it a ton by a lot, and they're like all their metrics, all their performance metrics are like their conversion rates are awful, their sales cycle is awful, their revenue attainment is awful, their product expertise and their teamwork is awful. Like there's nothing good across the board. Plus it happens on a repetitive basis. So let's say none of the coaching or none of the performance improvement has been working. It repeats itself. When you start to see repeatability in the seller's performance or lack of performance, then you start to be like, okay, maybe the seller is not a good fit for this role. And we need to remediate that and maybe help them find a better fit elsewhere. But you need to see that repeatability. You need to see that it's like, we've tried to help them, they've tried to help themselves, but it's just not a good fit. And we've looked at the totality of metrics to really understand beneath the hood, is it the seller's fault, or is it our fault? Other factors that we need to tweak and improve on to make the seller more successful.
Interesting. Very interesting. I always used to think, because, one of the reasons I ended up becoming, an outbound sales consultant, which is what I do today. The reason that I do what I do is because I went and got a bunch of jobs, and I kept thinking every year when I would change jobs once a year, that the grass would be greener on the other side, that the next company I go to would have it figured out and I wouldn't have to do so much prospecting. because prospecting, my funnel, my pipeline was my biggest problem, right? If I got into selling conversations, I would close deals. I closed deals. I hit quota more than a few times along the way, but I would think to myself, man, these people don't understand how to do marketing. Therefore, I'm having to spend all of my time, 80% of my time, just trying to convince people to think about the problem that we solve, because no one's thinking about it right now. Because we're not meeting the buyers where they hang out. We're not hanging out in the channels where they are learning about problem solving. And I kept changing jobs to think the grass would be greener. And I figured out the grass is not greener. And the people don't understand how to build prospecting. At the time, I thought prospecting was, and I still do believe in prospecting. It works, right? I can show you. My clients are making money. There's a big return on investment if you hire me, because I know how to go find these people. But you break some sticks. You break some glass. You break some eggs to get there. You have to with outbound prospecting. You got to bug people. So Nelson, I really appreciate your thoughts here, because it's a fascinating idea that there's a better way, right? And this whole idea of getting rid of quota, like, I'd be fascinated to talk to an org that is doing it. Like, I got to hunt out someone from one of those companies, bring them on the pod and say, like, how'd you make the decision to do that? And how's it been going for you? Because yeah, like, it's very clear to see some of the unhealthy things that a quota and commission and prospecting does, not just to the seller, but to the buyer and to the company.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, totally. And I think that, to your point, like, a lot of times it's because you have a lot of unhappy sellers. They keep trying to jump ship, but it's like, we fundamentally need to change the ship, so that you don't need to try and test if the grass is green on the other side. And just to kind of highlight or explain to people, we didn't really touch upon this, like, okay, so what's the alternative to prospecting then? And today what we have is a mixture between prospecting / sales development, and demand generation. And so those are the two methods that companies the two marketing methods that companies are using to generate and qualify leads. And I'm advocating, that given like the maturity of the internet and social media and how buyer preferences for being marketed to it, and the efficacy of marketing tactics, that that demand gen it takes over that exclusively, and we sunset prospecting, and we help people who are in sales development today transition to more productive and fulfilling roles, which they're anyways trying to do as soon as possible, such as into demand generation or sales or revenue operations and whatnot. And I outline a transition plan for that. So it's gradual, and that it's also part of that transition plan is to compare, to test, and prove. So it's like, you crawl, walk, run if you're in that position today, and you don't just change everything overnight. Yep. Right. Yeah. A seller, like, if you ask them, hey, what is really the key, like, ingredient for seller success? It's the quality of the leads that they have and the quantity. Buyers who want their help and have brand affinity, and the seller can facilitate a purchase and help focus on that and helping this buyer to buy and delivering a really good relationship, as opposed to trying to, if they have to do prospecting, try to pester buyers that don't want their help, or, aren't really excited to speak to them, or aren't, really, they're just kind of kicking tires and stuff. And so, good sales rests on good marketing, and the best way to do marketing today is with demand generation. Unfortunately for demand generation, because they have to compete, because prospecting is still the dominant and primary and core marketing strategy today, demand gen has sort of been relegated to supporting sales development with MQLs, which is code word for the contact information of uninterested buyers that demand gen acquires either through list purchases or through gated content, which, it's really crappy. In order to feed the people who are doing prospecting, so they can go out and, like, basically do a high volume of spam. And now there are people who are trying to do prospecting like you, more intelligently, smarter, to get better results and stuff like that. But I think even then, relative to what demand gen can do, and what demand gen is for people who don't know, is essentially wooing buyers to request a demo on the website, automatically qualifying on the website with a few questions on the form, and then directly connecting those qualified buyers with the seller, letting the buyer, like, book a time direct from the seller's calendar. And the way that they woo these buyers, the way that they make them aware, and the way that make them interested in speaking to sales, is what they call either through an organic strategy or a paid strategy. In other words, ads or non-ads. And so when you're looking at all the different tactics, you're looking at content marketing, social media, podcast, guest podcasting, co-market.
Wait, podcasting leads to sales?
Yeah.
What?
So, bringing on your audience on your podcast, bringing on influencers, chopping that content up and distributing on social media, on LinkedIn, wherever your audience is at, put it on YouTube, your email list of opt-ins. And when you use email, it's actually you're inviting people to come onto your podcast or to come be a speaker at an event, stuff like that. Or there's even, there's all these different plays and a million different tools that demand gen can use nowadays, to do that. So even, let's just say, events. So you've got firesides and panels and roundtables, this, that, and the other. And you invite your audience on, you invite influencers on, you record that, you post that, get a lot of engagement on LinkedIn or do your thought leadership. And then there's ads. There's all sorts of ads you can do on Google ads. You can do LinkedIn ads, Facebook ads. All the different social platforms to make people aware, top of funnel. You can target your whole audience, give them a relevant ad of like, hey, something interesting, something creative to kind of catch their attention so they can learn more about you. You can even do I think referral campaigns sit with marketing. And then even remarketing to previous buyers and users that change jobs. You can use software for that. So marketing can hit up people who go to new companies. All these different ways that demand gen can go about creating demand and capturing that demand or whatever, generating leads for sales, but they're prohibited from doing that as much as they should and can because they have to support sales development and prospecting. So it's like they compete for resources. They have to sort of be on this, what they call the MQL hamster wheel type of thing, and to support prospecting, which is why there's a big movement within demand generation, primarily led by Chris Walker from Refine Labs. If anyone knows him, I know you've known him and attended a few of his sessions. We both have. Where there's a movement within demand generation to basically liberate themselves from sales development. Now, they haven't come out so boldly to make it explicit that that's what they're looking for. They'll couch in terms of, we want off the MQL hamster wheel. We don't want to generate all this contact information on uninterested buyers. We don't want to do what they call the quote unquote lead gen model, which is what they're really saying is they don't want to support sales development, but they haven't been successful in that yet as much as they should be, because they haven't been able to to land a knockout blow because they haven't named the enemy. They're just fighting the symptom. And the enemy that demand gen needs to be fighting against in order to liberate itself is sales development, is prospecting. Now, I know what this can sound like to people who do sales development, to do prospecting. It's like, well, you're making me feel bad about what it is that I'm doing. And like, of course, it does help with meetings and it does help with revenue. But like, what I'm saying is like, that's not what I'm arguing against. And I think the definition of what works is the best possible ROI that you can get given all available marketing tactics, and that demand generation is superior to that. And you can't have it both. It's like, the way I see it, the way I kind of analogize it is that sales development or prospecting is like poison the champagne glass of demand gen. So it's like, it took me a while to understand what demand gen is capable of nowadays. But once I understood that, I was like, it doesn't make sense to pursue prospecting, even if you get meetings and revenue, at what cost and the hidden costs and the opportunity costs. And I unpack that a lot in the book to make people understand that. So I have done prospecting. I thought I had done prospecting as well as I could. And I wasn't even the best, and there's people who probably did it better than I was, but I still think that it's not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. So that doesn't mean a company can't grow with prospecting. I just think that a company won't grow as much as they can and should. It'll be more difficult and require more money. But I think the more and more that there's awareness about what demand gen can and should do, that it'll move in that direction. So my recommendation to people who are doing prospecting or sales development today is to skate to where the puck is going and if what I'm saying is true, then prepare yourself. And also, many people in this audience are really won out, even if they do believe in sales development and prospecting as the best way to generate and qualify leads, even better than demand gen or whatever, or that you should have both. But they still want out to basically, try to transition right away to demand gen or to other parts of marketing, product marketing, whatnot. And I kind of touch upon that in my book. Like, I think, demand gen and sales development are just, two different marketing ways to generate and qualify leads for sales. So it's very transferable. Even if you say like, oh, well, I don't really know so much about demand gen. Everyone starts somewhere, and you have the basics of generating leads and qualifying leads for sales. It's just, you're just learning new tactics. And so, I highly encourage that people start to think about, well, if the puck is going to move that way, how can I position myself so I'm in a more productive and fulfilling career?
I love it, dude. I love it. Let's kind of end the discussion on that. Skate to where the puck is going. For everybody out there that was inflamed by some things that Nelson said here, reach out to him. Nelson, you were very generous with your calendar for me. I'm sure you do the same for other people that are, very curious about how can I get into demand generation. I do see the puck is going there.
Totally.
That being said, let's wrap it up if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Unless you have one last thing you want to talk about.
I would just say to people, just to kind of wrap up here, to Kevin's point, like totally reach out to me. Happy to set up some time to chat if you got questions or you want some advice or you're struggling to kind of wrap your head around a certain aspect. Obviously, I encourage you to grab the book. It kind of breaks things down and in long form, it's more digestible. And then you can always, in the book again, is The Death of the SDR and the Birth of Buyer Centric Revenue. You can find it on Amazon. And then you can...
There'll be a link in the podcast notes.
Yeah, and you can follow me on LinkedIn, too. Nelson Gilliat on LinkedIn. I put out a lot of content pretty much every day. I've been doing that for the past couple months since the book has been out, where you can get a little bit of shorter snippets of what I'm trying to... And I'm trying to get better and better at this type of stuff, and a lot of you guys are helping me to articulate this stuff better and realize which part of my arguments are wrong and, how to better formulate this stuff. So I'm trying to... Because I know a lot of this can kind of seem new and radical or out of left field, so I'm trying to bridge that gap every day.
I love it. Well, I'm going to end the same way I do with everybody. Even though you're a marketer, you have been a sales guy, you have carried a bag, so let's end with the same 3 questions. The first question, what's the biggest commission check you've ever got? And it's a hot topic, commission.
Oh, that's a good question. I would probably say... It wasn't that much because, again, I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors around commission. I was being paid a low base anyway, and the commission wasn't even bigger than my base. So I quickly learned that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and promises about commission. And I know that there's some people who some of the time who will make a big commission, especially if they're selling very expensive products. But I know for me that wasn't my case, and then that helped me to understand and realize actually commission is a lot of smoke and mirror, and that it's not worth it, even if some people some of the time make a lot with commission. That again, it's like if you use that lotto analogy and speculate in the market, it's just because you can make some money some of the time, a lot or whatever. It's not worth it.
So you're going to refrain from answering?
I don't have a dollar amount to even give you an idea. It was nothing notable or significant that would even impress people. So I really just see it as the salary is really where it was at, and what I think most smart financially sellers care about, and trying to make your base salary as big as possible and trying to minimize your commission. Yeah. And so I think for good reason. And so imagine if you had full salary plus a bonus. That would be pretty tasty, wouldn't it? So I think that's what we should be fighting for, and people to kind of try to understand and articulate to other sellers and make people aware of the true nature of commissions versus proper compensation.
Right on. Okay, cool. Question number 2. What you're doing today or not, what's been your favorite job that you had in your life to date? Yeah,
I think looking back at my career in B2B and as an SDR, as a seller,
it doesn't have to be a career job. It could be any job.
Yeah,
that you
I would probably say it's been writing this book. It's been doing the research, doing the interviews, doing the writing, the editing, formatting. Building this kind of product of my own, this sort of vision or this model, kind of wrestling with these challenges that I had witnessed and seen and experienced, and trying to solve them and offer this alternative to people. And people seem to be quite receptive. The response from the community I have received from sales development, sales folks, marketers has been really positive and great engagement. And so that has been very rewarding. And I think that I'd like to leave B2B better than when I found it. And so I think that has been sort of my contribution, I guess, and that I'm very proud of. Now, I would say if any specific role that I've had within all the hats that I've worn, probably could be a bit of mixture between product marketing and demand gen, and not sales or SDRs. Or I just thought, I once worked for a startup and trying to help the startup articulate their positioning, their messaging, their audience, and then trying to figure out how to then communicate that in promotional messaging to kind of woo buyers in the door. Just seemed to me to be, again, more up my alley than helping buyers to buy and to deliver that one-to-one relationship, which is great and great for people who want that. I realized I was more of a marketing person than a salesperson.
Right on. And the last question, if money didn't matter, you didn't have to work for a paycheck, what would you do with your time?
Yeah, that's a great question. In another life, if I didn't have to worry about money, I've always maybe fancied a little bit of acting or something like that. I think that could be really cool to be involved, or at least in movie making, or it just seems like really fun creative work to produce movies and to act and stuff like that. I think a big barrier for a lot of people to go down that route is how unprofitable it is and how much competition there is. And so it's like, so few people make it, so they get discouraged from ever doing it, unless they come from a lot of financial means, and for them it's just a hobby. And so I thought that might have been interesting. Another part of me, before I ever got into B2B sales, I thought about law school. Clearly I have arguments and write and things like that, and basically propose a new case and try to challenge the old case, codify some new laws into effect. And so, I kind of put that off for a few different reasons. I never pursued that. But that could be something, to kind of go down. Ultimately I think that we derive a lot of our self-esteem and our purpose in life and happiness from productive work. So I wouldn't ever say that I would just sit on the beach and do nothing. I think that recreation supposes creation. And so I think, it's to try to find that thing that would entertain you and to keep your mind going and, keep you, keep you active. I guess they say that's what maybe they say, that the devil's playground, or idleness is the devil's playground or something like that. So just keep moving, keep busy. Yeah.
That's right. It's always an interesting question, right? Because I've done a few podcasts now. This will be episode 4 or 5, and no one said nothing. And I wonder if someone will. Like, there might be someone who's going to say, I'd sit on a beach with a Mai Tai and do nothing. Yeah. I think nothing is in my plan, right? In the episode 1, I talk about how I would have 2 part-time jobs just doing things I loved, like golf and beer and stuff. But I definitely would never work full-time. I would never dedicate and grind and get up in the morning and have to, come home late at night. I would just kind of work when I wanted to. I think that's freedom is the ultimate.
Oh yeah, right? Totally. Well, I think that's great.
Well, Nelson, thanks for coming on. Everybody listening, Nelson's book, The Death of the SDR and the Birth of Buyer Centric Revenue. You can get it on Amazon, which is probably the only place people buy books. It should be the only place you buy books. There's going to be a link to the book in the comments. Also, Nelson's LinkedIn profile, please reach out and connect with him there. Nelson, it's been great. We got to have you on to do a part 2 to dive in. I think it would be really cool to dive into ways that people could transition their careers from sales to demand gen, if that's something they want to do. We got to do a part 2. People stay tuned for that. We'll probably do that later this year. But thanks, man. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone.
If this episode is interesting to you, please share your thoughts on LinkedIn or Twitter. Tag me, and I might just feature your post in an upcoming episode of the Sales Career Podcast. Or, if you want to connect directly, go to hopconsultinggroup.com, and we'll find a way to work together. Cheers.